Israel is committing genocide in Gaza and Britain is complicit. In this video, we're going to find out how the Royal Air Force is using one of Britain's last colonies in Europe as a launch pad for sending weapons to Israel and flying surveillance flights over the besieged Gaza Strip. Joining me now, all the way from Cyprus, is Nick Brown, a student and activist who's been organising protests in solidarity with Palestine, calling for the British bases on Cyprus to be closed down. Nick, thanks for joining us. Great to have you here today.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for inviting me. Good to be here.
Could we start by hearing from you how people in Cyprus feel about having these British bases still there in their backyard, all these decades after supposed independence from the former colonial power, and particularly now at a time when we've seen that these bases are being used effectively as a rear base or a supply point for Israel's onslaught on Gaza?
Yeah, well, it's I think definitely a sore point for many Cypriots. I should start out by saying that I'm myself not Cypriot, but know plenty, and I think many people for a long time have been outraged that the United Kingdom, and not just the United Kingdom actually, but the United States as well, operate these facilities, which are no small thing. I mean, there's a huge air base in Akrotiri in the south of the island. There's also large spying equipment that stretch all throughout Akrotiri itself and also in the Dorodov Mountains. And it's very visible. You know, you go up to the mountains for a picnic and there's these giant antennae and white spheres, which have been used previously for the war in the Middle East, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. But as we've found out recently, have been used to collaborate with the IDF in their war and genocide on Gaza.
3% of the territory of Cyprus was kept by Britain at independence in the 1960s. And that includes these enclaves in the south that are fully controlled by British sovereignty, Akrotiri and Declassified, like you mentioned. But also, am I right in thinking you were referring there to, is it Mount Troodos, that the highest point on Cyprus, where there's this giant golf ball type structure run by GCHQ?
I don't think it's quite the same as the sovereign territories, but it's certainly operated by the United Kingdom, and I believe also the United States has quite a lot of operation in those facilities as well. So, like the NSA have operated out of there previously. So, yeah, it's very concerning.
And my colleague at Declassified, Matt Kennard, has been tracking flights going from the British base in Cyprus and landing in Israel with remarkable frequency. And these flights are military cargo planes that can carry vast quantities of munitions. Some of these flights have stopped off at other NATO bases in Europe and Turkey before heading over to Gaza. And it was also announced a few weeks ago that the UK would start flying surveillance flights that would go over the Gaza Strip, and they would gather intelligence supposedly that Israel could use to free hostages. But of course, we know that Israel's attitude towards these hostages can be pretty indiscriminate. Several of them have been killed. Perhaps many more. We don't have the full figures. So there are obviously concerns about how exactly Israel would use that intelligence that's being shared with them from these British surveillance flights. Nick, you've been on some of these protests in Cyprus. You've actually helped to organise some of them as well. What's the feeling like there around, are people aware of what Britain's role is? Are they becoming more aware as the conflict goes on?
Yeah, look, definitely. I mean, I guess to describe the general mood at the outset, it's just absolute outrage, anger at the complete atrocity that is happening in Gaza, but not just Gaza, but also in the West Bank, and the increasing aggressiveness of the Israeli state in the entire region, actually. So I think very much people are responding to that immediate barbarity that we're all seeing on our, TikTok and on our Instagram reels, and coming out and wanting to do something about it. So I think initially that's definitely the motivation, but I think as the movement's gone on, I think it's become more and more apparent how complicit the Cypriot government here is in this genocide, and also the UK, and the main way in which that has manifested has been through the bases here. Like you said, they've been sending supplies and armaments through the Akrotiri base. So I think there's a sense of like, Well, we are not just geographically close to Gaza, and there's a closeness there, and we need to respond because of that. But there's a strategic element as well that, well, Israel is directly benefiting off of this supply line that runs through Cyprus. And we have a responsibility to do something about it, actually. And it's atrocious that it's being done on our land in our name. So I think people are very much critical of these bases, and critical of the government for the government here in the Republic of Cyprus for not criticizing or challenging this supply route for Israel's genocide.
And these supply routes are something that we know Israel is heavily dependent on. We've seen, and I discussed this in one of my previous videos with Iona Craig, what the Houthis have been doing in Yemen, their blockade in the Red Sea of shipping bound for Israel, and the impact that that's having. A really interesting sort of backstory to the British base in Cyprus is that before the current onslaught on Gaza, there was a flight going from a BAE Systems, which is the largest arms company in Britain, from one of their bases in England, one of their factories in England that has its own runway. And every week it would fly to Cyprus, refuel, stay overnight, and then it would fly on to Saudi Arabia. And we know that flight was carrying spare parts for the Saudi Air Force, who use British jets and they were bombarding the Houthis in Yemen while this was going on. And my colleague Matt and I, we went to the factory in the UK and filmed this flight taking off. That's just another example of how the base in Cyprus has been really integral for British arms industry and foreign policy. And one of the remarkable things is that Houthis survived that onslaught by the Saudi-led coalition that went on for years and years, and they're now in this position where they're able to enact this blockade. The base at Cyprus, if I'm right in saying this, over the years there have been quite major protests against it. I think during the Iraq War, or in advance of the Iraq War, there was quite a significant protest there. Riot police were deployed, activists were arrested. Can you tell us a bit, Nick, about the protests that's being planned for this weekend outside the Royal Air Force Base in this corner of Cyprus that Britain still occupies? And are you concerned about potentially a heavy-handed reaction from the base authorities?
There is a tradition of protesting the bases. It's to varying degrees been a annual affair of certain groups going and demonstrating outside the British bases, which I think is an important tradition to keep up. But I think it's taken on a new form now that it's not just the question of sovereignty for Cyprus, but a question of being linked into this genocide. So so there's a demonstration being planned by the Cyprus Peace Council coming up this weekend on Sunday, on the 14th of January. We're hoping to get a decent crowd along. United for Palestine is helping to organize this protest. We've been putting up posters, leafleting people in the streets. We've announced it at our previous demonstration on this Sunday just past. So we're hoping we can get a decent crowd to get right up to the gate and point out the ridiculousness that this military base exists in this country. In terms of the response, yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's a bit of an open question, I think. We haven't heard much in response from the authorities there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it would be slightly heavy-handed. But look, our demonstration is going to be peaceful. We're going to be marching sort of from a location a bit further back and then onto the gates. And we want to sort of have our banners, have our speeches to point out to the world that this atrocity is being carried out here in a quite hidden away place, actually. It's kind of a bit on the outer from Limassol city. So I suppose many Cypriots you don't notice it in your day-to-day life. So I think it's very important that we get a lot of media attention and point out that this genocide is being supported right here on Cypriot land. So and it's been enabled by the United Kingdom as well.
And Nick, you're an Australian who's come to study in Cyprus and learned about the issues there. For people who aren't familiar with Cyprus, are there certain groups or social media accounts, journalists that they should be following to keep track of these issues? I know at Declassified we found it quite hard sometimes to see, who's organising these events and who we should be in contact with? Are there any, your own group, United for Palestine? You also mentioned the Cyprus Peace Council. Are there any others that you want to shout out?
Yeah, look, I mean, yeah, I would definitely, recommend people check out United for Palestine. We're slowly working on our social media. We're a new group. In fact, I mean, we were kind of set up with the initiative of having a specific Palestine campaign. There wasn't really anything in existence before us with regards to Palestine. So I encourage people to check out our Instagram account is quite active. United for Palestine Cyprus and United for Palestine Limassol. The Cyprus Peace Council, like you mentioned, is also a good source. There's been other organizations, a group called AFWA, which is like an anti-capitalist organization, has been involved in supporting a lot of demonstrations. A whole number of organizations, Akrotiri, NEDA, the New Internationalist Left, Hade as well. So if people want to go ahead and look those organizations up, they're supportive of this cause. And I suppose I should mention Edon as well, which is a student youth group who have organized some really great demonstrations in previous months. So I really encourage people to check that out. But yeah, so we're trying to improve our social media presence and communication, and there'll be definitely more actions to come even after this Sunday. And the basis issue is something we want to center more in terms of our campaigning.
Thanks, Nick. We'll be sure to follow up with either you or one of your colleagues next week to find out how that protest has gone. And I'll put in the chat box below some links to those groups that you mentioned if people want to follow them themselves and find out more. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel to help us make more video interviews like this with activists who've been engaging with the articles that we've written and carrying our work forward on the ground in these former colonies like Cyprus.